button.
Okay.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to today's Power Hour. I am very honored. My name is LoVina Louie, and I was born and raised in the Spelum where Albert and Veronica lived. And I am currently here on the Coeur d'Alene Reservation. And we are going to talk today about a nation of survivors, the Chief Joseph Band of the Nez Perce. And so I would like to now have Veronica and Albert introduce themselves to all of you today as we begin our Power Hour. So go ahead.
Go ahead, you can introduce yourself.
My name is Albert Andrews Redstar. I'm a Nez Perce and Palouse descent. I live in Coulee Dam, Washington, but I was born and raised in Spelum. To Virginia and Albert Andrews. My Nez Perce name.
I'm Veronica Redstar from Spelum, Washington, and Albert's youngest, well, not the youngest sister, but I'm his younger sister.
She's the feisty one.
Thank you, LoVina, for inviting us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you for that beautiful introduction. And I grew up and went to the Longhouse several times. I have children, Tawaya and Willie, and now grandchildren, who are of Nez Perce descent from the Chief Joseph Band. And so I just, I'm really honored that you have joined us today. And so I wanted to just start us off and I wanted you to just discuss a little bit about the early history of the Chief Joseph Band of the Nez Perce.
From what we recollect about things that were shared with us by our mother, by our grandparents, and by fellow Nez Perce people in various ways, our people came from the Wallowa country, the Wallowa Valley. At this time of the year, they would be returning from the canyons down near the river, the Spelum, Chief Joseph Creek, which empties into the Snake River in the lower Nez Perce country of the Wallowa. They would be making their way back up into the canyons and upper reaches of the Wallowa country into the valleys where it's more fertile, and it has a lot of grazing country for the horse herds that they had. They would have different village sites within the Wallowa country. In their history, they've had different encounters with those who came into the valley of Soyapos. These white people came in looking for country to settle, and some began seeking gold in our country. Conflicts arose from that, and eventually the conflicts grew to such a degree that the Soyapos who came in wanted some way of dealing with this. So it was said that they had to move. I'm really shortening the history, but they were told or evicted from our country, the Wallowa country, and made to move onto the Nez Perce Indian Reservation near Lapwai, Idaho. In that, they had to take all their cattle, all their horses, and everything that they possessed and left the country. I had to relate a lot of this when I went to work for the Nez Perce National Historical Park. I worked as an interpretive park ranger and went around visiting the various sites in the Wallowa country, and to realize that our people came from such a beautiful place that we have to come back there every year or so to be participant to a powwow where they invite a lot of tourists to come in and see us all dancing and all carrying out various ceremonies, only to go home a week later, where they were sent. In our case, we were sent to the Colva Indian Reservation. But because of the eviction, the conflict in the Nez Perce Indian War of 1877 occurred. In that, there was a long trek, some say 1,000 miles, some say 1,500 miles, but they took their horses and cattle on this whole trek. There's one false thing that came out of this. They credit Chief Joseph with having led the band on this long trek. However, it was done by a consensus of chieftains, Looking Glass, Whitebird. Some of these took over some of the leading and led us through the countryside all the way up into the Bear Paw battlefield in Montana. They were heading for Canada and to join Chief Sitting Bull. At the Bear Paw battlefield, it was 40 miles away from the Canadian border, where they decided to rest and rest their cattle, rest their horses, rest their people, the children involved, the elders. And it was there that they were captured by the infantry, by the cavalry, the soldiers that came and took them from that countryside and brought them down to, first they put them on barges and sent them down the river to Leavenworth, Kansas. And at some point they were moved onto the Indian Territory in Oklahoma. And they lived there for a number of years until 1885. They were moved back, finally granted permission to leave and come back to the Northwest. However, they weren't sent back to the Wallowa country. They were instead sent to the Colville Indian Reservation. On their way here, they were led out by horse and rail from the Wallula country, and some say Riparia, made their way by wagon train to the Fort Spokane on the Columbia River. They spent almost a winter there. And part of our history includes that it says that we lost relatives at the Bear Paw battlefield. They're buried there. We also lost relatives at the Fort Spokane site, and even some down in the Fort Lawton country of Oklahoma. So we have relatives throughout this trail that we considered sacred. They're burial sites for our people. But I'm bouncing all over the place. Anyway, from the Colville, we were invited by Chief Moses to come to this country. And that really crunches the history of how we ended up here. It could be a long and drawn out history but there are so many authors and so many books about the war. It's crazy because people assume that just because the Nez Perce Indian Reservation was created, that's where Joseph went. And we had tourists continually coming to us in the National Park Service asking direction to the Nez Perce Indian Reservation because many of them thought that's where Joseph was. So part of my spiel when I was talking with some of the tourists, we'd often point to them, no, we're up there in the Colville Indian country. We're living in this place called Nespelem, Washington, and that is where our chieftain passed away. And that's from where we descended. So if you want a more detailed history, read Alvin Josephi, read the various people. Yellow Wolf, Hemeen Makmak, tells a story of this war and of our being here. It was mentioned that we chose to come up here, and we didn't choose to come up this way. The government placed us up here, so it was an unwilling thing. But Joseph had died under the impression that one day he might be able to return to his home country, the Wallowa country. That never happened. He passed away and is buried near Nespelem. Many of our relatives are buried in the same plot near Chief Joseph. It's called the Nez Perce Cemetery in Nespelem. But like I said, it shortened the whole story, but that's how we came to be there. I'm rambling on now, so.
Well, and Albert, thank you for sharing that. And I remember when I think I first came back from Australia in like 1989, and we had one of the first powwows that probably had already happened, but when I went to the Wallowa for that very first powwow, it was so beautiful. The mountains, the lake, the deer that would walk up to you when we went to the Wallowa Lake. And when I stood in the Wallowa, and and I remember thinking, wow, your ancestors, this belonged to them. This is where they hunted. This is where they fished. This is why Chief Joseph didn't want to leave, because it was so beautiful. And I would, and when I think back, after I learned like so much more history about America, and after I think back and I think, no wonder why they didn't want to go, and to have been, but to try to get to Canada, to try to hold on to, like, from what I was told, it was to hold on to the religion or the way of life of your songs and your food gathering, and all of those ceremonies that your people did. That's why Chief Joseph was trying to get to Canada, was so that you could continue to live that life and continue to be who you were intended to be by Creator. And then to imagine, to be 40 miles, and we think about the distance of 40 miles after going over 1,000 miles in moccasins and carrying babies in baby boards, and with horses, and from one battle to the next battle, as the warriors just went and tried to maneuver. I mean, it's known as like the most strategic battle in America, the Chief Joseph War, that the warriors were so smart and so strong and were able to maneuver the people all the way there. And and then to think and to visualize and to imagine him standing there and saying, from where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. Let me gather the women and the children that are still alive, and to have fought so hard to get to that point and to be captured and then taken to Oklahoma, one of the hottest places in the country, in such different landscape and different everything. And I remember you guys like took a trip to Oklahoma, or some of the Chief Joseph band I know went to Oklahoma, to where Chief Joseph was a prisoner of war. He was a prisoner of war. His people that survived were prisoners of war by the United States government. And so Ronnie, is there anything you wanted to share about that history and how it impacted your life?
Probably from, I guess, our elder had to make a decision about where we were going to go. He had to make a decision for us as a people. And one of the things that stood out in my mind was that he did not want to convert. And so he didn't want to change, the faith that carried him through that trek and the people. And to me, that it was huge. I just felt like he stood for something and really truly believed that that carried our people through. And so relating that to a faith that I chose when I went to Haskell, I went to Episcopalian church. And I told my mother about that. And in a way, when you speak with your mother and when they don't answer, they're not happy. And so, but she kind of looked at me and she said, well, I always taught you kids to pick or choose a religion that you were going to follow. And you have to have all your faith in it. And don't jump around from one faith to another or religion. So if that's your choice, then I have to be okay with that. So when I come back from Haskell, and of course, we're doing things at our longhouse, quite a bit later while I was home, I told her, no, I'm going to stay with the longhouse. And to this day, I'm really thankful for her, honoring what my choice was, but also letting me decide or look at. And she said, don't mix the two, you choose one and you do what you can for that faith. And that's what we were taught most of our life. Because even our Katsa, our grandmother, she allowed us to go to other churches so that we would make up our mind or else relate what they did in their churches to what we do in our longhouse. So we, I think, had a better understanding of what it meant, the things we do in our longhouse. So I think with that, and following all the things that, she was teaching us, strengthened, not only our lives, but our place that Joseph, fought for us to carry on. And I think one of the messages that I received from our elders, and that includes my mother and our grandmother, is that they told us to really follow the faith, or not faith, but our religion, and not to stray from, I guess, the teachings, because they've heard through time in their lifetime where people grew tired of doing what we follow in our longhouse and do what they believe is taking shortcuts. And they would tell us, no, we don't want you taking shortcuts. To make it easier on you, we want you to follow all the teachings and not stray from it, because then it will change, what this faith really truly means. And I don't know if Albert wants to speak to that also, but to me, I gained so much from just observing, like some who come to the longhouse, you can observe and see how and what they do. We began to learn what everything that was in our longhouse meant and why they did the things they did. There was reason, as we see, sometimes we relate to maybe the Plains Indians and the things that they do in numbers, and that's the way we believe. So I think, all of that impacted me to know and understand that a lot of tribes and a lot of people really believe in the same way, and that's what really carries them, is if they stay on that path. And I think any faith, and I knew what my mother meant by, if you stay on that path and truly believe in it, it's your foundation to your life. And so that's what, I gained. And I'm truly, truly grateful to Chief Joseph in maintaining that and standing for that. And that Moses invited, our people here. And we were still able to continue on and still carry our faith in our way. So that's, what I'd like to share about us coming here and what we brought here, or our people brought here.
I mentioned books, a lot of books written about the Nez Perce War. One of them that was especially poignant about the conflict itself was written by McWhorter. He interviewed a man by the name of Hamin Makmak, Yellow Wolf. The book that came out was called Yellow Wolf, His Story. In it, he mentioned something about something you were pointing out earlier. When on their way back from the Oklahoma Territory, they were going to cross the Columbia River. And at that juncture, they were given a choice. Joseph had no choice. He was being sent to the Colville Indian Reservation, but amongst the others, they were given a choice. You can either go to the Nez Perce Indian Reservation or you can go with Chief Joseph. If you go to the Nez Perce Indian Reservation, you will need to convert and become farmers and tradespeople. If you go with Joseph, you can follow whatever he chooses and follow your own way. Yellow Wolf pointed out that this difference of choice was easy for him to make because he wanted to follow his chieftain to be what we wanted to be and to believe in what we want to believe. And it was this that was instilled in so many of us as we came up here. What's interesting about that choice, or the decision by the government to send us up here, our people up here, was that first we went to Fort Spokane and then eventually to Colville Indian Reservation. Almost 80 to 90% of the people here were already converted to either Christianity or some form of it. So here we are, our people being sent here, following the faith of our people, the Nez Perce Longhouse. And I remember when our kata brought us to these three churches, the last one we made a stop at was had a preacher talking about our people as Longhouse people. Kata sitting in the front row, and I was sitting just down the way from her. He started preaching about those who weren't going to go to heaven. They weren't going to be allowed to go to heaven because they weren't accepting Christ. He mentioned not the Nez Perce per se, but he mentioned those people in the Longhouse aren't going to go to heaven because they're not accepting Christ into their heart. And I had to look over at Katsa to see what she was remembering, if she could understand what he was saying. It offended me, and I was 10, 12 years old at the time. Our father had already passed away at that point. And at that juncture of my life, I decided I'm not going to be part of this church or anything like it. I began to follow more whatever we learned from the Longhouse and eventually became part of it, where we led the services. But I'll always remember that time, my katsa sitting there in her shawl and this preacher talking about conversion and what it meant to convert. And I think I became more Longhouse because of that. And it fits with what they were sharing with us. The contrast was so striking at that point. Here our elders are saying, if you choose a religion, follow it, choose a faith, because there's something greater than us. As opposed to a preacher standing behind his podium saying, if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell or someplace like that. So the contrast was really striking to me at that point. It's left a mark in my heart about the whole thing. But in the walk since then, we've followed the faith as much as we could. One of the things I remember Palaka talking about, not mixing the two, and it was validated by our mother, is to be careful about mixing the faith. You can get confused and mix up your mind and your heart. If you make a choice, follow that with all you have, and it will take care of you. An elder aunt once said, perhaps in her own way, this belief will take care of your life. And she followed it to her death. And so it is with the rest of us who follow that way. This is what we'll follow for the rest of our lives. This is what we'll share with our children in hopes that it will take care of them in time of need, in the time of grief, in time of loss, in time of such calamity as faces us with this crisis of the pandemic. I was telling my sister a little bit ago, it's ironic that this pandemic has caused many of us to stay home, many of us to isolate. And the result of that for many of us was that we have to do a lot of self-reflection. And so these truths come barreling out of the past and stare us in the face and say, this is who you are. This is how you are. This is what you believe. This is what you said. You hurt people with either your thought or your words or your actions. You did this to help someone. They become part of who you are again, because we're looking at ourselves a great deal more than we used to before, because the busy world can take you out of that and get you into other things. But the need to self-reflect was indeed a part of what happened to me during the pandemic, and it happened with my sister as well. But this thing about the war of the Nez Perce people had always been a significant part of our lives. We have relatives now living on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation, but they're in Umatilla, in Pendleton, they're in Yakima because of the scattering effect of the 1877 conflict and of what happened to our people after. It's significant to me that the lessons that were shared with us by our elders have always held us together as a group of people who still believe in a creator, who still believe in the gifts of the earth that is given to us to take care of in a certain way. And it's become, oh geez, such a lifting thing to sing the songs, to remember what we were said. It was said about them. This is when you sing this song, and it's just what it means. This is what it means to sing the song that celebrates the coming of the roots, this coming of the berries. This is how you pray. This is how you show your gratitude that you've been able to take this deer down, or this animal that's going to feed your family, feed your people. That's what the faith has come to mean for many of us who still follow our way. And I believe what Palaka said, I believe what my Ita said. Be careful about mixing. You always get confused. And I see people doing that today. And yeah, they have different ideas, different ways of doing things, more convenient to their liking. But there are some things in the way that, in a way, take over your walk, take over who you are, and you follow it as closely as you possibly can. So that's a long-winded answer to what Ronnie was talking about. my wife of one time, she's now gone, had always said, oh, he always just talks and talks and talks. So you have to kind of listen to him and be patient. I miss them, and I miss the other one. Anyway, that's my long-winded answer, like I said.
Well, thank you, Albert and Ronnie, for sharing, your thoughts about the war and how it impacted your people. And I know that, as you grew up and like on any reservation, it's hard, especially, like for the Colville Confederated Tribes, there were 12 tribes that were pushed onto this reservation, and many from different places. We have 3 different languages on the Colville, well, 2 different dialects of Insulchin and Nachamchin, but being put on the reservation, and just all that came with being in a place that wasn't your home, that wasn't what you called home, and growing up in that environment, and just all, like, and we learned quickly as I think, as Native people, of lateral oppression, and how to pull each other down, and how to judge each other based on the color of our skin, or based on what you knew or didn't know, or like those are the types of challenges that we face, and we continue to face today, even with enrollment, and whether or not our kids can be enrolled in a tribe if we have enough Indian blood. So there's been all of these things that our people have just had to face. And I know, because as an organization, as the Native Wellness Institute, we do a lot of healing in historical and generational trauma. We do a lot of healing to help our people to deal with that trauma, because that's, it was because of a lot of those traumas that many of our people turned to alcohol. And, even for myself growing up in the Spelum, I seen some of my dad's friends and my uncles die of cirrhosis at 30 because our bodies couldn't take the alcohol and couldn't digest it and couldn't process it. And, we had never had it. But when we got it, because of all that trauma, it was just like, drink it as fast as you can, and so how did you guys, like, if you if we can take this conversation into, what did you do to heal yourself? Do you want to start off with that question, Ronnie?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that Albert got involved in prior to Nanakoa, I know that the Adult Children of Alcoholics movement was coming to the United States, and Albert and others were part of the initial start of Nanakoa. But LoVina, my story. When I came home, I did start drinking and continued for a few years doing that. But one of the things that I was dealing with as a single parent was, what I wanted for my children, and I learned through different, I guess, texts and whatever I heard, is that your children will follow what you model, not what you say. And so one of the things that happened when my kids were, getting into high school, was that my son attempted suicide. And I think that was one of the greatest, I guess, messages that impacted me as a parent. And I kind of leaned on Albert, and he was doing some ACOA work. And so I had started going through some trainings with him. But one of the greater things that, he introduced me to was Nanakoa. And when I started going, I'd often sit and hear people's stories, and I would think, they're talking about me and the things that, I learned about my childhood, and I learned about, my parents and my grandparents and the families that were associated with everyone, not only from our longhouse, but in our community. And I started trying to make change. Sometimes kind of did surface work and said, oh, this will be all right, I'll be okay. But I think basically what I learned was that you have to really almost gut yourself out to kind of find who you really are. And pretty painful, but I kind of look back at, you know, how I was raised, and we were raised by our grandmother and our mother when she was as a single parent. We lost our father, and she became an alcoholic, and so our life with her was impacted. And I really didn't want to look at that because, you know, I knew that she had been doing a lot of work with our grandmother about the longhouse, or following that faith. But she at one point turned around because she lost all of her brothers, and most of it was due to alcoholism. And she wanted to take care of her parents. In doing that, we traveled around with her to a lot of longhouses in the valley and Umatilla. And she said, you know, what we do is similar, but just a little bit different. So all our beliefs are the same. But watching her turn her life around, you know, that's what I admired about our mother. She worked really hard at it and changed. And we could feel it. We knew when she made that change. So with that, you know, we truly understood, you know, that what we needed to do was to maintain that, but also to look within ourselves about forgiveness and what had happened to us as young people, as children. You know, our grandmother raised us, but she taught us so much. And she lived it daily. She sang every day. And when those seasons came, she made us do whatever was necessary to gather the roots. And, you know, she made us go with her to the mountains and stay and pick berries, and watched our uncles hunt deer, and we had to cut the deer and do everything with her, with the deer, and how to take care of them after. But I guess in that, I'd like Albert to talk about Nanakoa, because I think that was one of the avenues that I used, and the wonderful people that, you know, worked for Nanakoa, and how they helped me understand. And when I would talk to them, they would, you know, truly make me look at myself. And it's a lifetime work. You know, I figured I was healed and I was done, and wasn't true. So, but I'd like to, you know, have Albert talk about that, and how, you know, LoVina, I really loved the time when that movement came to Nespelem. And of course, a lot of things that they wanted to happen with Nanakoa, they brought to our council. And at that time, they weren't ready. I don't believe they were ready to really look at that. And I think a lot was brought here, you know, with that movement. And so, but today I see a lot of, you know, ways, you know, that the people still have to work on their sobriety and, you know, healing. So I'm really happy that, you know, those are still happening. But I remember that time it came to our reservation, and how many people, you know, did a lot of work with that.
Quite a while ago, in the country itself, the adult children of alcoholics had begun a movement that was underway for about 2 or 3 years or so. We were contacted by Joanne Kaufman. Joanne worked with the Seattle Indian Health Board at the time, and she was reaching out to Native people to go down to New Orleans, where they were having a big conference, a big gathering of people, ACOAs. So a bunch of us took off, about 50 to 100 people, Native people. Got in on some of the workshops, some of the meetings, and walked around, just kind of enjoying New Orleans. I'd never been to New Orleans before. But a few of them decided maybe we ought to start our own. So we called a meeting, and Joanne chaired the meeting. A bunch of us sat down, they hammered out different things about ACOA, came up with a name, Native American Children of Alcoholics, NANACOA. Everybody was getting excited. They were writing position papers, all these kind of things. But they decided to come out at one of the evening gatherings, and we were given the time slot. Sang a song and talking about a preamble and the formation of NANACOA. What was significant was that I had already become a member of the Longhouse and was just learning to use a bell. My friend Deb said, "We're going to sing, we need a bell, right?" I didn't bring one along. So we went running around and found in a curio shop, I think it was a hotel curio shop, it had these little things tourists can buy. And there was a ceramic bell, and we grabbed onto that bell, ran in, let's take this and we'll use this. So I sang a song, reminiscent, and it always had struck me when our mom taught us. It's an old song that our people carried from the Wallowa country and on their trek through during the war and all the way into Oklahoma Territory. So I sang that song and told people, this always reminds me of a coming home. That's what the song means to me. It can mean something different for other people, for other individuals, but for me, that's how it struck me. A song significant of us coming home. So we became a formation, and NANACOA was born. What a time that was. They had conferences after that. They called their first conference for Montana. They were hemming and hawing about doing this and doing that. And the expectation was, well, we should get maybe 100 to 200 people, right? 300 at most. Yeah, getting excited even more. Went and showed up in Montana. I can't remember where we were, but I remember being in a hotel. Nobody was drinking. Nobody was allowed to go, or at least that was a standing way. And instead of 300 people showing up, 800 to 1,000 showed up. We're all just touched by that number. Our expectations were just way lower, and here we are, we're looking at 800 people learning the first steps of addressing issues within their home and their family. NANACOA survived for some years and did some good work. It helped a lot of us on the reservations to address issues that were under the table or not talking about, kept in the closet. And we began to see a different way of healing added to the ways that we already had. Things that I had learned in NANACOA, I coupled with what we were learning in the Longhouse. Eventually, I was handed a bell to lead services, and I became a leader of the Longhouse for quite some time until a problem with my ear. I can't have the sound of a drum. But that was a significant time. The people of the NANACOA, I still remember them all the time. Joanne stands out in my head, in my mind, as central to bring us together for that first time. She served as our chairman for quite some time. But another old lady came into our presence, and she brought a message to us of healing. She now lives in Vermont, and she talks about having been born and raised, or at least living in Omak, orangutan in her own way. But Jane Middleton Moss became a vital part of our organization at the time. She remarried, but she lives in Vermont, and I might go ahead and move over there because that's where Bernie is. But Jane became a family member to us, and we visited with her one time. This is a funny trip. Ronnie and I went over just to visit, right? So right about that time, Jane thought she would have a yard sale. And so she was putting all her things together, and Ronnie and Anna came over. And they were all sitting there pricing all these things. And guess who walked away with a whole bunch of stuff? Ronnie. She had a broken wheel on a piece of luggage, and she was carrying that through Pittsburgh and all the way home. So every once in a while, when Jane says she misses us, and we ask her, at least Ronnie asks her, when is your next yard sale? We'll come on over. We'll help you out. We'll help you out again. I'll buy half of what you have. But it was a significant time and a good time of healing. And it put a lot of things back into perspective about the pain we carried in our families, the trauma that we faced, and some things we didn't even know and didn't admit to. So it became a part of our lifestyle, our walk. I really regret that it doesn't work it isn't around anymore. I wish it would come back in some form. Sean, son of Jane, often laments the same thing. We've had people we've lost since then. Harold was a vital part of that. He's now gone. So Nanakoa is still significant with many of us, and I hope it continues in some form. I know that an organization called White Bison is existent from then. They're a little different, a little more slick in their presentation, but they're doing some of the same kind of work. And hopefully it continues to be a part of people's lives today. It's a hard thing to admit how alcoholism and trauma has affected our people, but you need to do it. You need to walk into it. There was a lady of prominence who talked about Buffalo not running from the rain instead of heading into the storm, not be like a cow. She said that's the way she dealt with things. And I think she was chairman of her tribe at one time. Wilma Mankiller. And I see that you have on your agenda or on your roll, Theta Newbrist. Hi, Theta. Crazy lady. But man, these ladies stood out as bringing a message to our people. We're bringing a message of healing that we need to do. And guys, you need to do this too. This is tough. Guys, you need to be a part of this. You can't sit back and say, oh, the women will take care of this. No, you have to be a part of it. Another thing we learned in the Longhouse is that the two go together, men and women. We're part of this life. We need to be a part of this walk every step of the way for our children. And just because we were taught, our elders showed us these things and left it for us to take care of. This is how we do this now. We need to learn that again. We need to go back to that. So, thankful to the Himin Mukmuks for what he said, that you follow the way you want. You choose that and you become part of it, and it becomes vital to you. He didn't say it in so many words, but you could feel it in the things that he had said in his book. Our chieftain, with such wisdom, took care of our people to a certain degree. One of them, in fact, both of them are Kalatsa, which is our grandfather on our father's side, lived as an orphan in his teepee. Our Kata, our maternal grandmother, also lived in that teepee. She grew up there. In fact, he helped take care of her when she was a child. She couldn't walk very well. She always did tell the story about her uncle, who wrapped her up in a rug or something and rolled her back and forth over her hips. Eventually, she was able to walk again.
Mhm.
So Katsa said, "You don't make money off him. He is just my uncle. You don't make money off his name." Her uncle was Chief Joseph. So we have an attachment to the chieftain. We are descendants of the Joseph Van der Nez Perce. We resent that anthropologist who said we're no longer Nez Perce, we're Colvilles. That's a Soyapo way of looking at things. This anthropologist also said the same thing about the Wenatchee. They're not Wenatchees anymore, they're Colvilles. And really muddied the picture for them. And I hope that anthropologist learns in his heart the truth of who we are as a people. If he's going to work for the Nez Perce people, perhaps he needs to turn that thing around and begin to understand these are the people with whom I work. This is what their background and truth is all about. We are descendants of the Joseph Band of Nez Perce. We're still here. We're Nez Perce Palouse. My grandfather came from the Snake River country, and I'll always go back down to the Lyons Ferry area because that's where he grew up. He was born in a village 2 miles upstream from the town of Starbuck, Washington. So, and he left there and eventually wound up here on the Colville Reservation. He became the Walasat leader for our longhouse and was handing that down to each and every one of us. So we have a lot to be thankful for today, and grateful to you for letting us putting this venue in front of us. Shocking as it was, just as unprepared as everything. I rattled off, and anyway, I'm gonna put the spigot back on, and so I'll sit here and quietly listen to it.
You know, one of the things, LoVina, that you had mentioned, and I think over time we've realized and, you know, understood is that our invitation, you know, to the reservation was acknowledged by our elders, and grateful, very grateful to be here and find a home. Now all our people are buried here, but we go to Wallowa. We understand, you know, what they longed for. Even up to, you know, our Katsa.
Hmm.
She would cry about it. And to understand that, you know, many of the elders in our longhouse that we grew up with, you know, they too didn't feel like we were truly belonging here. That what lingers is that they wanted to go home. And that was, you know, our leader's wishes was to go home. He was promised over time. That promise was always broken. And we see that, and sometimes we have animosity over that. Because at times when we're dealing with 12 tribes and we're only orphans to this tribe, you know, not only us, but the Palouse, and we're both half Palouse and half Nez Perce. That's really hard to have ground here and have, you know, the leadership understand and accept us even. And sometimes, you know, that's the truth. We are not really truly accepted yet. And it's going to go on forever. And, you know, but that's the saddest thing, because I still hear it in different, you know, places on the reservation, friends I've made, you know, well, you guys aren't really from here. And just little statements, you know, and they don't really understand how that feels.
We still get asked, why did you guys come here?
Yeah.
Why did you want to come here? What
Mhm.
made you want to come here? I didn't want to cut in on Ronnie's story too quickly, but it reminds me of something that had happened with us. We're little kids, right? Kata and Palaka would travel all over and bring us along. But adding to that, my uncle came to visit mom one time at the house, and she was, like Ronnie said, she'd been partying and doing different things. But he came to her one night and told her, I'm sick and I'm going to die. He was our uncle who painted for the BIA. He did a lot of house painting. And in the winter time, they would paint inside these houses, BIA houses.
Mm-hmm.
What was part of it was lead-based paint. And so he was exposed to the lead in the paint and in the various things that they used. So he knew he was dying. So he came and told mom, somebody needs to look after mom and dad. I'm telling you this because I'm hoping you'll do that, because I'm going to go pretty soon. Sure enough, he passed. So she began to go down and take care of Kata and Palaka, look after their needs. They would want to go, or they would need to go to a funeral of a relative, either on the Umatilla Reservation, Yakima, or even at Lapwai. They would go and be part of the services. One significance about that amongst those people is that mom would say, they always call on him. Every time he goes to a different longhouse, they call on him to speak. And it was explained to her by a relative down there. He says exactly what needs to be said. He says it from here. He says it from his heart. This is a thing that he left for us. So this became part of her movement. She began to learn from Balaka and from Katsa, all the ins and outs of the longhouse, how to do this, how to do that, what comes first, what needs to be said, what needs to be sung. She was eventually chosen by an elder of the group, by Mrs. Cleveland. She was the head of the women at the time. She was the one that named mom. She will be the next leader of the women. She got resentment from the older ones, but they still had to go along with what Alalimtai said. So she then took up the leadership of the women during the services. She carried all that knowledge into that exercise. At the same time, she began to show us, rather than tell us, this is what needs to happen. This is what needs to be done. This is what prayer means. This is what the song means. All those things became part of our lives. But I think from all of this, they left us these things to follow through and carry out with our lives today. I'm beginning to lose my message. That's what happens when you get so darn windy. But they showed us in the language all the things that were significant to our teaching, as they say. And it began to fit with what we're talking about with Nanakawa, with AA, with all of these. We found that our people had our own way, and they match almost word for word, action for action, the faith healings of all people around the country, especially indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
We got in touch with some Australians through Anna Latimer, Anna Hansen now, with some Australians, and we sat in her house talking about these things, and we suddenly looked at each other and said, we're brothers. He was an Aboriginal people, a young man from Australia. He said, we're brothers. He looked at Ronnie, he looked at me and says, we're kin in our way because we believe the same thing. He says, I see people from Japan, they say the same things. They talk about the spirit in this way. We're just like each other. I see people, and he was talking about all these countries he'd been to. But I agreed with him. He says, we are all of one mind, of one heart. And it's truly amazing that in this land where we're looked at as heathens, there are still people out there who reached out to us. Your mom and dad were significant in that. We became part of their network, we're part of their friendship, and now part of the family. So we're all like one because we believe a certain way about everyone. This is what was handed to us by our kata. And I know Veronica's middle name is Susan. That's what our Katzat's name was. Susie Williams was her name. So this is where Ronnie gets all that compassion, all that stuff that she does. I don't know about the goofiness, but but
Well,
I say,
Albert, when you were just talking about that, I remember when I went to Australia as an exchange student, and we were out with Aboriginal ladies, and we were gathering traditional foods with them, and
Mhm.
they came onto our bus and they started to sing a song to the Seven Sisters, and I just started crying. It just made me want to go home. It reminded me of home. It reminded me of the longhouse. And it was so amazing. And,
Mhm.
and so before we end today, cause we only have a couple more minutes left, but before we end, I just wanted people to know that the Chief Joseph Band of the Nez Perce that Albert and Veronica or Ronnie belong to, their longhouse burnt down a few years ago, and where they gathered to sing and pray and have funerals, the longhouse completely burnt down to the ground. And so they've been trying to fundraise to build a new longhouse for their people. And so, I just and hopefully we'll be able to find. I tried to look for the GoFundMe. I wasn't able to find it, but if somebody knows where that GoFundMe page is, or if they can contact Albert or Ronnie, and they're still trying to fundraise so that they can have a longhouse. And so if anybody out there who's watching or listening, has the financial resource to donate to the Nez Perce Longhouse, and they have their own Facebook page, and I wanted to share that really quick. And maybe that's the place where people can go to, to be able to find it. So if you go to Facebook and you type in Nez Perce Longhouse, it will come up, and this is the Facebook page. And so if you go there, hopefully one of somebody will be able to put on there the GoFundMe. But that's where the donations would be to build a longhouse. So I just want to say limlem katsiaya and
Mm.
chaspaus kalichast.
Mm.
Thank you from my heart for being with me today. I've always like Ronnie's like a mom to me. She's always taken care of me. She's always looked out for me. I've always respected her as a single mother, and all of her children. Gina Bug is a warrior woman in her own right, and so I just am really grateful and thankful to both of you for joining us today. And I just, ask that the Creator will wrap his arms around you, and he'll pave a way for you to have a new longhouse, that one day my grandchildren will be able to walk in that longhouse and sing and pray. And, so thank you for your words and for all the love that you shared with us today. And we thank all of you who are listening, who joined us today. We thank you for your time and your energy and your love. And we just ask that you all have a great day, and wonderful day today. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Albert.
Love you.
me too.
Love you.